Eastern Front, February 1943. Snow falls in a silent rhythm, muffling the world to a pale whisper. The ruins of Kharkov stretch across the horizon, a graveyard of steel and brick. In the cratered earth between two frozen ridgelines, a lone figure lies motionless beneath a sheet of white canvas. His rifle, a battered Mosin Nagant, glints faintly through the frost. A small, fractured mirror is fixed to the side of his scope, an odd contraption, dismissed by others as foolish. The men in his unit had laughed when he built it, calling it a coward's toy. But laughter has long since died out here. Through the mirrored glass, he watches a German Panzer column edge forward. The lead commander, confident, rides half-exposed from his turret, binoculars raised, scanning for threats that no longer move. The sniper exhales once, slow and even. The mirror catches the glint of a distant sun. The rifle cracks, a single, sharp note against the winter air. 600 yards away, the Panzer commander collapses into his hatch. The tank shudders to a halt. In that frozen silence, one man's strange idea becomes legend. Because this wasn't madness, it was survival turned into innovation. By early 1943, the Eastern Front had become the deadliest classroom in human history. From the ruins of Stalingrad to the plains of Kharkov, soldiers learned, through blood and frost, how to survive the most lethal environment on Earth. The German Wehrmacht had once rolled east with unstoppable force, but now it found itself locked in a war of inches, against an enemy that refused to die. In that crucible, a new kind of warrior emerged, the sniper. No longer the romantic marksman of old, the sniper of the Eastern Front was a product of industrial warfare. He was a ghost that moved between the cracks of collapsed factories and burnt-out villages. His purpose wasn't just to kill, but to unnerve, to break morale, to make the enemy fear the silence between gunfire. The Soviets understood this early. When the city of Stalingrad became a fortress of rubble, the Red Army began training men and women to hunt unseen. They studied camouflage, breathing control, light discipline, and patience that bordered on the inhuman. Names like Vasily Zaitsev and Lyudmila Pavlichenko became symbols of defiance, celebrated in Pravda and whispered among the troops. Every bullet counted. Every movement risked death. But as German snipers adapted, the duel became a war within the war, a game of visibility and concealment. The Germans had the precision engineering of Mauser K98K rifles, often paired with Zeiss Zielvier 4X scopes, offering crystalline clarity and reliability. Their optics could pick out a flicker of cloth or the glint of sunlight across several hundred meters. The Soviets fought with what they had. Their standard sniper rifle, the Mosin Nagant 91/30 PU, was robust and deadly in the right hands, but its optics were simpler, a 3.5x magnification scope with limited field of view. It was accurate, but not forgiving. And when both sides hunted across open snowfields or within shattered cities, exposure meant death. The first rule of the sniper's duel was simple: see without being seen. The second was harsher: if you are seen first, you die first. By winter 1943, both armies had perfected the art of invisibility, but even perfection wasn't enough. A single reflection from a scope lens, a puff of breath in the cold air, or the faintest twitch of movement could betray a man who'd waited hours for one perfect shot. That's where desperation began to feed invention. Frontline snipers started modifying their weapons, crude but clever alterations to survive longer, see better, and shoot safer. Some raised their scopes to allow for firing from defilade positions. Others bent their periscopes from shattered vehicles into makeshift observation devices. In the ruins, anything that could reflect, magnify, or conceal was turned into a tool of survival. It was in this environment, this constant arms race of survival, that the idea of the mirror scope was born. Not in a factory, nor an armory, but in the frozen dirt between two worlds. A mirror mounted at an angle allowed a sniper to aim from below cover, to watch and fire without showing his head. It distorted the image slightly, required practice, and was fragile under recoil. But for the few who dared to use it, it meant living another day. Official command viewed such field modifications with suspicion. The Red Army preferred discipline, not improvisation. A broken or misaligned scope could waste ammunition, an unforgivable crime in a war that measured progress by the centimeter. And yet, innovation persisted. Because in this war, survival itself was the greatest form of ingenuity. From Stalingrad's shattered apartments to Kharkov's frozen hills, the front became a laboratory of fear and brilliance, where the simplest scrap of glass could mean the difference between life and legend. And as 1943 dawned, the snipers of both sides began to realize something profound. Whoever could outthink the other, even by inches, could alter the entire rhythm of battle. The next winter offensive would put that theory to the test. These stories aren't just history, they're proof of human courage and sacrifice. If you too salute these heroes, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and become a part of our journey. And don't forget to tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Let's continue the story. By 1943, the Soviet Union had formalized what desperation had taught them, that the sniper was no longer a supporting role. He was a weapon of strategy, morale, and terror. The Soviet sniper doctrine, refined during the battles of Stalingrad and Sevastopol, emphasized endurance and adaptation. Snipers were trained not only to shoot but to think, to become invisible extensions of the landscape itself. They were instructed to use debris, frost, smoke, and even corpses as cover. Many created their own hideouts within the ruins, often living in them for days. Manuals taught patience as a weapon. Wait, one Red Army training note read, until the enemy believes you are not there. But even within this discipline, individuality thrived. Frontline snipers began bending rules, experimenting with new ways to see and shoot. The mirror-scope was one of many such inventions, not formally issued, not officially recognized, yet whispered through the trenches like a forbidden trick. The idea was deceptively simple. A small mirror, angled before the scope's eyepiece, allowed the shooter to sight through reflection rather than direct line. This meant he could position himself lower behind cover, reducing exposure by several inches, often the exact difference between life and death. The setup, however, was crude. Mirrors vibrated loose under recoil. Frost blurred the glass. Alignment was difficult, and even a slight miscalibration threw the shot wide. Most officers dismissed the concept as unreliable. But a few snipers, those who had watched friends die from a glint of light on a lens, were willing to risk imperfection for safety. The Soviet field workshops along the front line became hubs of quiet experimentation. Mechanics repurposed tank periscopes, aircraft mirrors, and broken optics from captured German rifles. What emerged was a patchwork of designs: side-scope mounts, angled mirrors, even periscope-like housings that allowed shooting over trenches. Some prototypes resembled later Cold War periscope rifles, decades ahead of their time. Others were little more than bolts, tape, and faith. The German side, ever observant, noticed the effects long before they understood the cause. Reports began surfacing from the Army Group South sectors, references to invisible shooters whose firing positions couldn't be spotted even after counterfire. In Kharkov, one Wehrmacht officer described in his journal, "We are hit from angles impossible for a prone position. Our optics find nothing. The Russian ghosts are watching without being seen." In response, the Germans expanded their counter-sniper schools, particularly in Krakow and occupied Poland. They emphasized coordination between snipers and machine gunners, teaching suppression through rapid-fire zones rather than direct counters. Observation posts were dug deeper. Spotters began using armored shields. But technology was catching up with desperation. The race to see further, clearer, and safer became an obsession on both sides. German optical engineering was unmatched. Companies like Carl Zeiss, Hensoldt, and Voigtlander refined multi-coated lenses that resisted glare and distortion. Soviet optics, simpler but rugged, evolved through necessity. The PE, PM, and finally PU scopes became symbols of endurance over elegance. And still, despite all that glass and steel, the greatest advantage remained invisible: the human mind adapting under pressure. For Soviet snipers, especially those trapped on the defensive, invention wasn't pride. It was the only option. A single wrong movement could draw fire from tanks, mortars, or aircraft. The battlefield had become an environment where even standing could mean death. In those conditions, One small mirror could feel like salvation. The mirror-scope was never officially catalogued, never mass-produced. It existed in fragments, mentioned in memoirs, sketched in notebooks, hinted at in scattered reports. But behind those fragments lies a simple truth. It worked. It allowed one man to strike from safety, unseen, and to prove that ingenuity could overcome superiority. As the war shifted into its next brutal phase, the retaking of Kharkov and the approach to Kursk, the lessons of these silent duels began to influence command thinking. The Soviets started to recognize that battlefield innovation didn't always come from laboratories. Sometimes, it came from the frozen hands of a soldier refusing to die. By the spring thaw of 1943, hundreds of these small improvisations, new camo patterns, scope shrouds, modified mounts, were spreading across sniper units. The front was transforming into a proving ground of human adaptation. And at the heart of it, somewhere among those countless fields of white and fire, one man's mirror scope would soon prove its worth in the most decisive way imaginable. The human angle. War reduces invention to instinct. For the sniper who built the mirror scope, it was never about genius, it was about fear. He was an ordinary infantryman once, armed with the same Mosin nagant and the same rations of frozen bread. But after months on the line, watching men fall to unseen bullets, his world narrowed to one principle: survive the next shot. Snipers were solitary figures in an army built on mass assault. Their victories were invisible, their failures instantly fatal. Many described the loneliness as a second front, days of silence, no movement, no voice. Hunger gnawed, cold numbed the fingers, and still the eye never left the scope. In that quiet isolation, small ideas could save lives. A broken mirror scavenged from a wrecked truck, a few screws, a piece of wire. These became weapons as real as any rifle. The mirror scope was born from this private world of endurance. He knew the risks. A misaligned reflection could send the bullet wide, revealing his position. Frost could crack the glass. But when the sun caught the German optics and death came searching, he had something the others didn't, a way to see without being seen. And that was everything. Behind every legend in war lies a human calculation. If I die, my idea dies with me. He could not afford that. So he tested it quietly. He learned to read the reversed image, to adjust aim by instinct. He taught his muscles to trust the mirror more than the eye. With each kill, he gained confidence, not in the device itself, but in the mind that created it. The laughter of comrades, the ridicule, faded with every confirmed hit. By the time he brought down the Panzer commander, no one laughed anymore. The technological angle. The mirror scope was a field invention, not a laboratory creation. Its principle was simple optics, reflection of the aiming image through a small angled mirror, usually set at 45 degrees to the scope's line of sight. It wasn't the first attempt of its kind. The British had experimented with periscope rifles during the First World War, particularly at Gallipoli, where trench exposure was suicide. Those contraptions used offset triggers and mirrored sights to fire from behind cover. But in the Soviet adaptation, the idea was stripped to its essence: minimal materials, maximum survival. The sniper's version used what he could find: fragments of shaving mirrors, vehicle glass, even polished steel. The key was placement, angling the mirror to reflect the reticle of the PU scope without distorting it. The rifle remained aimed normally. The shooter simply viewed it from below or to the side. There were flaws, of course. Parallax errors increased at long range. Any vibration could throw off alignment. The reversed image required retraining of the shooter's perception. Left became right, up became down. Yet, once mastered, it offered a profound tactical benefit: the ability to observe and fire from defilade, nearly invisible to counter-snipers. Later analyses suggested that Soviet sharpshooters may have shared such techniques unofficially across platoons. Small sketches in field manuals hinted at angled sight use or indirect viewing through reflection. Whether command knew or simply turned a blind eye remains uncertain. The mirror scope represented a philosophy more than a tool, the triumph of adaptability over regulation. It reflected a broader truth about the Red Army's evolution, that victory depended as much on individual innovation as on centralized doctrine. Every fragment of glass mounted on a scope was a quiet rebellion against the rigidity of war. The tactical angle. The battlefield of 1943 rewarded patience and punished exposure. The terrain around Kharkov, rolling snowfields, intermittent forests, shattered farmhouses, offered cover only to those who could merge with it completely. Traditional sniper engagements relied on concealment, camouflage, and superior observation. The mirror scope changed that balance. By allowing the shooter to remain entirely below the horizon of view, it nullified many standard counter-sniper tactics. German marksmen were trained to look for glints, shadows, and head silhouettes, signs that betrayed a hidden rifle. But when the shooter no longer needed to raise his head at all, those signs vanished. The first time such a shot was reported, German spotters assumed artillery had done it. The angle seemed impossible. The victim struck down from a direction that revealed no shooter. It took days before intelligence officers realized that some Soviet snipers were firing from concealed pits, their rifles aimed through small notches in frozen ground, using mirrors to align their sights. This altered tactics at the micro level. Soviet units began assigning sniper pairs, one with conventional optics, the other using mirrored sightlines from lower ground. Their combined fields of fire could trap advancing infantry or expose enemy sharpshooters. For the individual soldier, it meant longer survival. For the German command, it meant confusion. In a war defined by vast movements of armies, the mirror scope's impact was small, but psychological warfare often begins with a single bullet. When a Panzer commander or officer could be struck down by an unseen rifleman, it sent ripples of fear through entire formations. And fear, in war, was a weapon just as lethal as any rifle. As these mirrored rifles began to appear sporadically along the front, Soviet units started to believe that they had outsmarted the enemy, not through numbers, but through thought. That belief, that sudden edge in confidence, would carry one sniper toward his moment of truth on a frozen February morning outside Kharkov. The enemy's view. To the German sniper, the Eastern Front was a test of discipline against chaos. They were trained in precision, in patience, in the clean mathematics of marksmanship. Many came from hunting traditions, expert woodsmen, calm under pressure. But the frozen plains of Russia did not reward refinement. They rewarded endurance. By 1943, German sniper units were elite, often organized under regimental intelligence sections. Their scopes were masterpieces of craftsmanship, Zeiss Zielwehr, Hensoldt Dialaton, instruments built with surgical precision. A German marksman prided himself on accuracy measured in centimeters. Then came reports of untraceable Soviet shooters. At first, the accounts seemed exaggerated, battlefield myths. But soon, company logs began to note consistent patterns. Officers killed from impossible positions, casualties without visible muzzle flashes. A Wehrmacht lieutenant near Belgrade wrote, "The Russian fires from nowhere. We see only the result. A man drops, then nothing." Counter-sniper patrols grew frustrated. Spotters swept suspected zones through high-grade optics, searching for reflections or movement. Yet, when the Soviets fired through mirrors or periscope arrangements from behind snow berms, there was no exposure to detect. German snipers were forced to adapt. Some began using decoy helmets on sticks to bait shots, revealing hidden positions. Others coordinated with machine gun nests to lay suppressive fire in fan patterns across suspected areas. But still, every duel felt uncertain, like facing an opponent who could see without being seen. The psychological toll was real. It eroded confidence. It made every step into open ground feel like walking across a stage under invisible lights. One veteran sniper of the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler Division later remarked after the war, "You stopped looking for movement. You started feeling watched." That invisible tension, the sense of unseen eyes, became one of the Eastern Front's most terrifying realities. The leadership angle. Inside the Red Army, innovation was both prized and punished. Official doctrine valued obedience. Deviations from procedure risked being labeled undisciplined, or worse, sabotage. Yet at the same time, Soviet command celebrated results, especially those that humiliated the enemy. The mirror scope existed within this paradox. Commanders in field headquarters were aware of special rifle attachments, as they were sometimes called in reports. A few officers encouraged experimentation, especially when sniper kill counts rose. Others dismissed it as unreliable tinkering. The sniper who first demonstrated its value outside Kharkov found himself under scrutiny. Some officers considered his device dangerous. It could break, distort, or waste ammunition. Others saw potential in it. But bureaucracy moved slower than bullets. No production line was authorized. No patent filed. Still, whispers spread. A commissar reportedly ordered photographs of one such rifle to be sent to Moscow for review, though no official records remain. In the field, the culture of fear and improvisation shaped everything. Soviet soldiers had learned that command often caught up only after success was undeniable. Until then, innovation survived only through secrecy. The leadership's lesson was clear: victory forgives disobedience. When the sniper's mirror-scope dropped a German Panzer commander, the tale spread faster than any memo. Word of mouth among troops carried it across units. It became a symbol of ingenuity under fire, the kind of triumph that propaganda could quietly celebrate without acknowledging how it defied regulation. To the brass, it was an anomaly. To the men, it was proof that even the simplest idea could tilt the balance of death. The moral angle. War consumes invention the way fire consumes air. Every discovery, every clever design, comes at a human cost, often paid in silence. For the sniper, the mirror scope wasn't pride. It was survival. Yet in using it, he also became part of a machine that perfected killing. His invention didn't just protect him. It made his enemies fear deeper, their deaths more sudden. This paradox haunted every innovator on the front. Each improvement, from camouflage nets to silenced rifles, saved lives on one side only by ending them more efficiently on the other. The mirror scope symbolized that moral contradiction in its purest form, the act of seeing differently to end another life unseen. To the soldiers who heard of it, the story wasn't just about tactics. It was about the fragile boundary between necessity and cruelty. The man who created it was both engineer and executioner, survivor and destroyer. Historians later tried to trace his name. Some claimed he was Ukrainian, others Russian, perhaps from the Third Shock Army. But the truth likely died with him, buried in the ruins of Kharkov. His legacy, like the reflection in his mirror, existed only through distortion, shaped by rumor, half-belief, and the haze of memory. But the moral weight remains. In war, the most powerful weapon is not always the one with the longest range or greatest precision. It's the one born from the human refusal to die, the desperate brilliance of a soldier who bends the rules just enough to stay alive. That spirit would soon reach its breaking point, on the frozen ridgelines above Kharkov, when the mirror scope would prove itself not in theory, but in blood. February 1943, the outskirts of Kharkov. The landscape is silent again, as if exhausted by war. Snow covers the wreckage of last month's battles, softening the edges of burned tanks and shattered houses. Beneath that surface, entire divisions prepare to fight once more. After Stalingrad, the Red Army presses westward, confident, but battered. The German army, though wounded, is not broken. They regroup, determined to retake Kharkov under Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, launching one of the most brilliant counterstrokes of the entire war. The Soviets, stretched thin and cold, face armored divisions returning like ghosts from the ashes. Among them, the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte, with its columns of Tigers and Panzer IVs, cutting north through the blizzard. On a low ridge east of the city, a small Soviet reconnaissance detachment digs in. They are the eyes of the advancing front, scouts, machine gunners, and 2 snipers. One of them carries a rifle that others still call strange. The mirror scope. 4 days, they've watched the roads. Every hour, the sound of engines grows closer, a deep metallic growl echoing through the valleys. When the sun breaks through the clouds, it reveals movement, the unmistakable outlines of German armor advancing in column. Through the mirror, the sniper studies the lead tank, a Panzer IV, its turret rotating lazily. On top, a commander stands half exposed, binoculars glinting in the winter light. He is confident, certain that nothing in this frozen wasteland can threaten his steel behemoth. The Soviet detachment huddles low, debating retreat. Radio contact with their battalion is lost, their flank has collapsed. To their left, infantry positions burn under mortar fire. The enemy will soon overrun the ridge. But the sniper remains still. He adjusts his mirror, tightening the bolt that holds it at a precise 45 degrees. The image in the scope is reversed now, left and right swapped, but his mind knows the correction instinctively. He breathes in. Frost crackles on his mask. The Panzer column halts. The commander lifts his binoculars again, scanning the snowfield where nothing moves. He cannot see the man who is about to change the rhythm of the battle. The sniper's spotter, a quiet corporal, whispers a distance, 600 yards. The wind is steady, cross left, light. The sniper dials his scope, 3 clicks for drift, 2 for range. He exhales. The reticle settles. The trigger breaks cleanly. For a moment, the world pauses. The sound reaches them a heartbeat later, a sharp, precise crack echoing through the frost. Through the mirror, the sniper sees the effect. The German commander jerks backward, struck clean through the chest. His body collapses into the turret, his binoculars falling into the snow. The column hesitates. Engines idle. Confusion ripples through the ranks. The following tanks halt, unsure whether they've hit a minefield or been ambushed. Officers shout, but the cold wind scatters their orders. The sniper works the bolt, ejecting the casing, chambering another round. His mind is calm, his heartbeat steady, the discipline of hundreds of hours alone on the line. He knows he has seconds before the enemy reacts. Another figure emerges, a radio operator leaning from the hatch to check on the fallen commander. The sniper fires again. The man drops instantly. Now the Germans react. Machine guns swing toward the ridge, tearing into the snow. Mortar crews scramble to target the suspected origin of the shot. The Soviet detachment dives for cover. But their sniper doesn't move, his rifle barrel still aimed, his eyes fixed through the mirrored glass. He waits for the recoil smoke to clear. He's not shooting for glory. He's watching the effect, how panic spreads faster than bullets. The Panzer column halts entirely. Without the commander, coordination breaks down. The armor pulls back to regroup. In that chaos, the Soviet scouts retreat down the slope, disappearing into the tree line. The ridge is lost, but they've bought hours, maybe a day, for their comrades to reposition. The sniper finally lowers his rifle. His face is pale, unblinking. The mirror, cracked slightly from recoil, still reflects the grey winter sky. Behind him, one soldier mutters, "It worked." Another simply nods. No cheers. No celebration. Just the sound of engines fading into the snow. The sniper wraps his rifle in cloth, hiding the mirror from sight. He knows he'll be questioned, perhaps even reprimanded for altering equipment. But deep down, he also knows something far greater. Today, a reflection had defeated armor. And across the field, in the confusion of the German lines, officers will soon report a new mystery, a single shot that came from nowhere. That mystery would travel up the chain of command, reaching intelligence desks, and eventually Moscow. It would be studied, doubted, dismissed, and remembered. Because innovation rarely announces itself. It simply proves its point, one bullet at a time. The report spread faster than the thawing snow. Within a day, Soviet field radio chatter carried a rumor that a sniper near Kharkov had dropped a German Panzer commander with a single shot at 600 yards. No one knew his name, but every man knew the feeling, that surge of vindication when an impossible idea proves itself under fire. In dugouts and frost-bitten trenches, soldiers began describing the event with reverence. The sniper who used a mirror, they called him half myth, half comrade. For some, it was a story of cleverness. For others, proof that ingenuity could triumph where standard issue failed. Among the sniper detachments scattered across the front, the legend grew practical roots. Others began to tinker, bending reflective fragments, adjusting scope mounts, experimenting with their own versions. Not all succeeded. Many shattered mirrors or misjudged alignments. But something had shifted. The idea was now alive. Across the lines, German observers were equally perplexed. When their officers inspected the halted Panzer column, the scene defied logic. The commander had been hit squarely from a low angle, one that implied the shooter had remained below the visible ridgeline. No shell casings were found near the expected position. The Germans scoured the area, suspecting mines, indirect fire, or even ricochet. When they finally uncovered a small depression in the snow, a sniper's pit barely large enough for a man and rifle, they found traces of broken glass glinting in the ice. The report filed that evening described the shooter as using an unknown optical method, possibly involving reflection. It was dismissed by some as battlefield exaggeration. But to the German snipers in nearby sectors, it confirmed their growing unease. The Soviets were fighting not just harder, but smarter. The following week, Soviet units fell back under relentless counterattacks. Kharkov would soon change hands again, Manstein's maneuver restoring German momentum for a brief moment. Yet within that broader defeat, one quiet victory endured, the knowledge that adaptation could strike even the seemingly invincible. For the sniper himself, survival remained the only goal. He was pulled from the line for debriefing by a political officer who demanded an explanation for the altered scope. According to later accounts, likely drawn from reports archived in 1943, the sniper demonstrated the mechanism before a skeptical audience of engineers and officers. He placed his rifle on a table, the mirror still cracked from recoil. When they asked how he could possibly aim through such distortion, he simply replied, "Because I had to." No official adoption followed. No medals were awarded. But the incident entered the unspoken folklore of the Sniper Corps, one of countless unrecorded moments where survival bred invention faster than bureaucracy could react. Still, the demonstration left an impression. Months later, similar mirror-based sighting devices appeared sporadically in Soviet workshops, particularly among the engineer-sapper units responsible for defensive fortifications. A handful of captured German documents mention Soviet mirrored optics or reflective aiming devices, though these references were vague, perhaps exaggerated by confusion. Whatever the truth, the idea persisted, quietly influencing the logic of concealment. What mattered most wasn't the device itself, but the principle it revealed, that the sniper's greatest weapon was not his rifle, but his imagination. As the Red Army advanced again in 1944, new equipment followed, improved camouflage cloaks, side-mounted scopes, and shielded optics designed to eliminate glare. Many of these developments can be traced, at least philosophically, to that same mindset of adaptation born in Kharkov's snow. Even decades later, in Cold War sniper manuals, subtle echoes remained. One Soviet training guide from the 1950s advised, "The skilled marksman must see from where he is not seen." That sentence, stripped of its original story, carried the DNA of that mirror's reflection. Meanwhile, in Germany, captured Soviet rifles occasionally revealed strange modifications: offset mounts, peculiar brackets, even mirror fragments affixed near the scope eyepiece. Wehrmacht engineers inspected them with curiosity, noting that while the concept lacked precision, it demonstrated remarkable fieldcraft. The war would grind on, devouring innovation as quickly as it produced it. But small, personal acts of ingenuity like the mirror scope hinted at something larger. That technology in war is not always the child of laboratories, but of loneliness, necessity, and will. For that sniper, the battle near Kharkov marked both triumph and burden. His idea had worked, but the war around him remained merciless. Each day brought fresh retreats, new casualties, and fewer familiar faces. At night, he reportedly cleaned his rifle in silence, polishing the mirror as if it were a relic. Those who saw him described a man neither proud nor broken, just tired. A craftsman of survival, aware that his invention would likely die with him. But on that day, for a fleeting moment, a reflection had bent the course of reality. It reminded every soldier who heard the story that even in the most industrialized war humanity had ever known, the smallest act of human improvisation could still pierce the armor of machines. That moment, a single shot through a mirrored scope, was more than an instance of marksmanship. It was the collision of ingenuity and war itself, refracted through frost and glass. And as the spring of 1943 unfolded, its echoes would ripple quietly through both armies, a symbol of the invisible war waged not only with bullets, but with ideas. The snow melted slowly that spring, revealing the scars of yet another battle fought, lost, and fought again. Kharkov changed hands, then changed back, as if the city itself could not decide who it belonged to. For the Red Army, the withdrawal was bitter but not hopeless. Each retreat left lessons in its wake, small, hard-earned fragments of progress buried beneath the ruins. Among those fragments was the story of the sniper and his mirror. No official report carried his name. His action didn't alter the outcome of the battle, nor did it make headlines in the Soviet press. But among the sniper detachments scattered across the front, his method became a quiet symbol of what the war demanded: imagination over instruction, adaptability over obedience. Morale on the Eastern Front was a fragile thing. Victory and despair traded places daily. For many snipers, whose war was fought alone and unseen, inspiration mattered as much as ammunition. The tale of a man who turned a scrap of glass into a shield against death resonated deeply. By the summer of 1943, whispers of mirror shots had become part of the campfire folklore that sustained the exhausted. Soldiers spoke of unseen comrades who fired from reflections, of German officers who feared their own shadows. It didn't matter whether every story was true, the belief itself was enough. Psychologically, it offered something rare: empowerment. For the first time in months, men felt that ingenuity, not just orders, could keep them alive. Sniper instructors at training schools in Kuyabyshev and Moscow began referencing advanced concealment techniques, teaching cadets to exploit every element of terrain and light. Though they never used the term mirror scope officially, the philosophy was unmistakable: minimize exposure, deceive the enemy's eye, survive longer than logic allows. At the same time, Soviet engineers quietly took note. Reports from frontline units mentioned unusual optical attachments found after engagements near Belgorod and Oral. A small research team within the Main Artillery Directorate, GAU, catalogued these improvisations: crude mirrors, angled plates, and modified scope housings, as examples of field creativity worth studying. One internal memo from mid-1943 summarized the lesson in stark terms. Our soldiers adapt faster than our factories. For the Soviet command, that sentence carried both pride and unease. On one hand, it proved the ingenuity of the Red Army soldier. On the other, it revealed how much of the war's innovation was happening outside official channels. Meanwhile, German field reports from the same period began noting increased sniper concealment efficiency. Their manuals warned units to assume that Soviet marksmen might not be visible even when muzzle flash was absent. Observers were instructed to fire preemptively at likely positions rather than waiting for confirmation. This was more than paranoia. It was a sign that fear, seeded by stories like the mirrored shot, had altered tactical behavior. The enemy was no longer fighting just a visible foe. They were fighting the idea of an invisible one. For the sniper who had fired that fateful shot, survival meant anonymity. He returned to his unit, fought through the retreat, and vanished into the long churn of war records. His rifle, with its cracked mirror, was likely scavenged or replaced before the next offensive. Yet the principle he proved endured, that survival on the modern battlefield belonged to those who thought differently. As Soviet forces regrouped in the months before Kursk, commanders recognized that innovation could not be confined to laboratories. It lived in the minds of exhausted soldiers, in the split-second decisions between life and death. And in that recognition lay the quiet legacy of a single bullet that changed how men saw the battlefield itself. By late 1943, the tides of war had turned. The Red Army stood not as a battered force but as a rising storm, sharper, faster, and armed with lessons written in blood. From Stalingrad's rubble to the plains of Kursk, Soviet marksmen played a role that no machine could replace, silent eyes and steady hands shaping chaos one shot at a time. The mirror scope, though never standardized, became a symbol of that transformation, a metaphor for how necessity had redefined ingenuity. In the shattered landscapes of the Eastern Front, soldiers no longer waited for new orders or new tools. They built what they needed from what they had. Captured German reports from 1944 mentioned Soviet snipers employing deceptive optics, though the descriptions varied wildly, from angle plates used for indirect observation to claims of decoy rifles paired with reflective bait. The line between myth and method blurred further with every retelling. Yet each mention carried the same undertone. The Red Army's capacity for adaptation was now an enemy unto itself. Inside Soviet command circles, the mirror shot story was occasionally invoked as an example of initiative under duress. Political officers used it in lectures about creativity serving the collective, though ironically, the very act that inspired them had been born from individual defiance. After the war, as archives reopened and manuals were revised, the name of the sniper who first used the mirror disappeared entirely. He became one of thousands of ghosts absorbed by the machinery of Soviet history, anonymous, efficient, and forgotten. But traces of his influence survived in the doctrine. Post-war sniper manuals, particularly those issued between 1946 and 1952, emphasized lateral concealment, urging marksmen to observe from indirect angles whenever possible. They advised building optical blinds using glass shards or polished surfaces to spot movement without exposing one's silhouette. These were the mirror's descendants, refined and stripped of their origin. Even in Western intelligence reports, analysts noted these techniques with curiosity. A declassified British briefing from 1954 described Soviet training as innovative in environmental adaptation, citing examples of field-expedient visual camouflage. It made no mention of mirrors, but the resemblance was unmistakable. In time, the legend crossed into quiet circles of sniper lore, retold in training camps, sometimes exaggerated, always respected. To a new generation, it wasn't about the hardware. It was about the mindset. The mirror scope became a story of how war transforms people, how desperation breeds invention, and how invention often dies unrecognized, leaving only its shadow behind. In later decades, modern optics and periscopic systems would achieve the same goal through precision engineering, allowing soldiers to observe and shoot from cover. But their spiritual ancestor was a cracked piece of glass taped to a rifle in the snow outside Kharkov. The man who conceived it likely never knew his impact. He may have fallen before the war's end, buried among millions. Yet in that fleeting instant when he turned a simple mirror into a weapon of survival, he embodied the quiet intelligence that defines soldiers everywhere, the will to adapt, to endure, to fight unseen. His single shot did not win a battle or shift a front. But it changed something deeper. It reminded men that courage in war does not always roar. Sometimes it reflects. And as Europe burned and rebuilt, that reflection endured, not in glass or steel, but in the memory of what human ingenuity can achieve when cornered by extinction. From the ruins of Kharkov to the textbooks of future marksmen, the lesson remained unchanged. When the world demands obedience, survival belongs to those who think differently. War, at its heart, is not only a contest of weapons, it is a contest of minds. The mirror-scope was not a marvel of engineering. It was a shard of glass, salvaged from destruction, reimagined by desperation. Yet in that single act, that moment when reflection became protection, it revealed something timeless about humanity's relationship with war. Innovation in battle rarely begins in laboratories or command tents. It begins where survival and imagination meet, in the dirt, in the cold, in the silence between gunfire. The sniper's mirror was a testament to that truth. It was born not from ambition but from necessity, from a mind that refused to accept the limits imposed by fear. Across history, the greatest leaps forward in warfare have often come from such moments, when a single soldier, unknown and uncelebrated, redefines possibility. The mirror-scope stands beside the countless small miracles of adaptation that shaped the Second World War. The tank traps welded from scrap metal, the field radios improvised from broken parts, the courage to think differently when obedience meant death. And though the war moved on, consuming men, ideas, and cities alike, its reflections never truly faded. They linger in the philosophy of every soldier who learns to blend with the terrain, in every strategist who sees creativity as survival. The man behind that mirror may have vanished into the anonymity of history, but his idea remains etched in the conscience of warfare, that intelligence, not just firepower, defines victory. Because in the end, the mirror-scope was never just about a shot fired across snow. It was about the human capacity to see differently, to turn fear into focus and fragility into innovation. That, more than any medal or monument, is how legends survive. In reflections, fleeting, imperfect, but unforgettable.